Good morning and welcome to AirSage's Brewing Data. I'm Robert Kohler, and I want to thank you for tuning in to learn more about data today. A little bit about myself. I'm the CRO at AirSage and a professional transportation planner with two decades of experience in the transportation and big data spaces. Today, we're going to be covering some very important topics: transportation initiatives and projects at NCDOT, prioritizing public engagement and public decisions in transportation planning, and also the importance of partnerships for DOT projects. With that, I would like to introduce our guest for today, Nastasha Earle-Young. Nastasha has more than 10 years of experience working with Governor Cooper's policy staff and also working with federal, state, and local partners. She's a statewide initiatives engineer with NCDOT's Transportation Planning Division, and she serves as a project manager for the NCDOT statewide multimodal transportation plan, and additionally manages North Carolina's Transportation Innovation Council. She's also a member of the NCDOT Core Resilience Team. I'm extremely excited to introduce Nastasha Earle-Young to the show. Hello and good morning, Nastasha.
Good morning, Robert, and thank you for having me today.
It's great having you here today, and thank you for joining us on this lovely Friday morning. But before we kick things off this morning, I want to congratulate you on receiving the WTS North Carolina Triangle Woman of the Year Award recently.
Thank you, Robert. It was an honor to receive the award.
That's great. It was very exciting to hear that when I found out that we'd be chatting today. So that said, I have a long list of questions for you this morning. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Let's start by talking about transportation initiatives and projects at DOT. You were a project manager of the NCDOT Strategic Transportation Corridor Master Plans and NC Moves 2050 plan. What is the vision and mission of these projects, both in the long and short term?
Awesome. So NC Moves 2050 plan is NCDOT's long-range multimodal transportation plan. So it's a plan that's updated about every 10 years. It lays the foundation and the blueprint for our transportation system for the next 30 years. It is a policy-based plan. And with this particular plan, we actually laid it out in tiers for our recommendations. And so our tiers we laid it into three tiers. The first tier being actions and strategies that we felt like could be fully implemented within the next 10 years. Tier two was actions that could be fully implemented in the next 20 years. And then tier three was actions that could be implemented within the next 30 years. And the reason why we broke it up like that is because we realize in implementing anything into the transportation world is that things take time. And so we really focused on initiatives that had already started, already looking at directives from our governor that were already in place or already in the pipeline of being developed, as well as looking at what our federal requirements were as well at that particular time. But then also hearing from our stakeholders and knowing how we wanted our transportation system to grow, and knowing that policy changes are sometimes required in making those different decision making things in order for them to actually happen in the future. So we realize that takes some time. And so you need that 30 years sometimes to make those things actually fully be able to be put in place. And then for our strategic transportation corridors, those are 25 critical corridors to our state. And those corridors were designed to actually be the backbone of our transportation system for them to promote system connectivity, mobility, and enhance economic prosperity throughout the state. And so, with those, we just laid the foundation within our policy of saying these are the most critical corridors to our state. And within the master plans, we're actually developing the vision of those corridors with our stakeholders and partners. And so a part of doing that is actually looking at not just what the foundation of the roadway is, far as the functional classification of that roadway, but also bringing into things such as connected and autonomous vehicles. And if we have an ITS system that is set up for that, but also looking at electric vehicles and what are those hubs along there, and what are the gaps that are along there, as far as looking at disadvantaged populations, and how do you bridge that gap in between there. And so we have a lot of different things that we're looking at, and looking at the actual corridors and looking for the vision. And so that is just the first step in helping us guide everyone, and how you're going to look at starting to do driveway permits based on that information that you have within those master plans.
Wow, that sounds quite comprehensive, talking about things from driveway permits all the way up to actual roadway corridors that traverse our state. So, what are some important elements to consider when developing statewide projects and initiatives?
So some core things is to think about your workforce. You really have to think about, do you have the resources to actually do the plan that you're actually trying to think you're going to do, or the particular project or initiative. And then next is to look at the demographics for those specific areas, and also to identify your key stakeholders that you're going to need to bring to the table to make sure that you bring them along the way in doing the process of a project. And then you also want to look at past plans that have already been done so that you can learn from those lessons and also learn from the information that's already been gathered. But then you also want to gather your current data. In North Carolina, we are a very data rich state, which is very different for some other areas. And so it's very important that you do a data gap analysis to understand what data you already have, what data is maybe outdated, or what data that maybe you don't need, because with a lot of data, sometimes it can almost be too much data to identify what's actually really best for the particular project or initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point. There are so many different data sets out there which can be complementary to one another. But oftentimes, sometimes people jumping into a project without thinking it through first think more data is always better, as opposed to understanding, look, we can get data overload and then you can't even sort through it, or you're less prone to making the insightful conclusion that you can make with data. So,
Right.
what types of big data have your teams used in the conduct of creating plans and initiatives that you've worked on?
So we've used cell phone data in past initiatives that we've used. We've used our annual average daily traffic counts. We've used truck traffic data. We've used past revenue data, such as your taxes that you pay every year, also your revenues from driver's license, as that does go into the revenue forecast. You also look at what are your highways uses taxes. You're looking at your tolling taxes. We're also looking at our floodplains. We're looking at future inundation on the roadway system as we're moving into the resiliency world. We've also looked at uh gosh, it's just a numerous amount of data when you talk about data. But we've also looked at traffic forecasting as well. And then we also use social media data as well to help us.
Excellent. And I live in a very low lying area in the Wilmington region, so I definitely understand needing to look at flood zones and how that sustainability and resiliency would be along those elements. But shifting gears to prioritizing public engagement and public decisions in transportation planning, you've already made great reference to stakeholders and things like that. But from your experience, why do you think it's important to engage with communities before and during the planning of changes to transportation networks?
It's so important because everybody is using the transportation system every day to just do their everyday life. And so the last thing you want is someone to come and knock on your door and say, "Hey, we're widening out in front of your road," immediately when it's happening. Or even if you're just purchasing a home, you want to know what are the future transportation that is going to be happening in that area, because that is going to affect how you get to home. It's going to affect how you get to work, to school, how you necessarily travel, or activities that you want in the area. And you may be looking at what are the different modes that are available to you when purchasing a home, or just looking at moving to a different part of North Carolina or any other area. You need to know that valuable information. And so it's very important that, we start at the beginning and making sure that we bring people along the way and looking at, well, this is what the current land use is for the area. And then talking to, it's so important to talk to the municipalities, but also talk to the county, because sometimes those overlapping of visions for the land use can be very different. And making sure you bring people to the table so that, you can try to get those land uses to match up a little bit similarly where the lines start to cross. And so that's very important. And in North Carolina, it's really important because we own 80,000 miles of roadway, which is the second largest amount of roadway system in the US. And so it's even more important that we go the extra mile to make sure that we're bringing all of our stakeholders to the table and getting them involved, because the last thing you want to do is spend a whole bunch of money and get to the end of your project and realize that nobody is happy with the project that you have, when you've spent 30 years just in the planning phase and doing environmental documentations, just to actually get to the building process. And so it's so important that you bring everybody along with you and you figure out what are some mitigation strategies to help communities, because we realize that it is a financial burden to sometimes shut a roadway down, to actually get things to actually move a little bit faster, because in today and age we want things to move very fast. And so, in wanting to move things fast, that can also be a hindrance to the economy system if you shut down a road completely, such as the I-40 business that happened in North Carolina, making sure that you can reach out to businesses to figure out how can you assist them and help them, when those type of things happen. And so if you do that ahead of time, it can make for success in the future. And sometimes there are hiccups and you have to learn from those.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a good thing you brought up, you've got these different layers and levels of government. You've got the state DOT, you have regional governments, you have the county, you have towns and cities and other local municipalities that all have to come together, but also leveraging the fact that there are people who live here who are really the end user of what the project will be. So it's good to get all of them on board at the outset of a project. Do you think that using location analytics and big data can help project teams better understand the public's needs? And do you think that this insight can help encourage public involvement during the planning process?
I most definitely think it would definitely help. We have used it on a couple of projects, from using geo targeting with doing our social media. And so, for those that aren't familiar with geo targeting, it's basically an analytics tool where you can actually specify where you want specific ads to show up, for people that live in a certain region. And so, for this particular area, you pick a community and you kind of circle it on the map and say you want it to kind of pop up in the advertisement, will pop up as they're strolling through their social media. So they're able to see that information. And then you're also able to look at that information to also getting that cell phone data is really important. Some people may not like cell phone data, getting that. But we can use that to use it against verifying some of our modeling tools, such as our travel demand model. With our travel demand model, we are inputting our census data and then we're assigning where we think the traffic is going to go in the future. And so by having that cell phone data, every model is a model and you have to use it as a tool. And so with a tool, you have to verify it, with other information. And by using that data, such as the location data, you're able to verify, hey, am I doing the right percentage to these different TAZ zones that people are going to? Are these people taking these different particular routes? If we put in a new road, how do we think that route is going to go based on the data that we've already seen from our cell phone data? So that was just an example, of how helpful it has been for us.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm very well familiar with how mobile device data can be used for travel demand models. And, whether it's an input or whether it's to validate and calibrate what that model output is, definitely great uses of it. And, you bring up a good point, public perception of using this data. And there was a blog post a few years ago, I think, where it was to the effect of a transportation institute was pretty much saying, we know where you move around, but we don't care who you are, because we generally don't. We really just want to plan appropriately for the better good for the larger number of people. And
Exactly.
that's how we can get these investments properly made, so we're not investing in the wrong infrastructure that might be unnecessary if we otherwise didn't have access to that data. But with
Mhm.
many projects being undertaken by NCDOT, let's talk about the importance of partnerships for those NCDOT projects. What are some of the partnerships and collaborations that NCDOT has for transportation planning and development projects? And have any of those specific partnerships been notably effective, and how?
So we have an interagency coordination process that we use through our transportation planning process, where we're doing comprehensive transportation plans and also metropolitan transportation plans. And what this analysis process lets us do is it lets us interact with all of our different multiple state agencies, to get them involved in every part of the process, whether it's reviewing documentation as we are developing documents throughout the way, whether it's reviewing maps that's been developed, far as your natural hazards or human environment information or artifacts. And so we also want to bring them to the stakeholder table to let us know that we're checking off all of our I's, trying to create a better linkage between planning and environmental linkages. And so through that interagency coordination really allows us to be able to do that within the planning process and being able to transfer that information over to our project engineers when it does start going through that environmental permitting process. We also have a good relationship with our metropolitan planning organizations and our rural planning organizations throughout the state of North Carolina. Rural planning organizations are not actually federally mandated, but our North Carolina rural planning organizations have been around for 20 years. They have come to be a great partner for us. We do fund our rural planning organizations through our federal research and planning funds that we get at the state. And so that is how they are able to be able to run. With them, they help us in every part of our actual transportation process, from the planning process and developing the comprehensive and transportation plans, but also they help to actually get projects funded, as they are able to give local input points towards projects to be funded and to end up going into our STIP. And so we have greatly brought together a partnership, and they have quarterly meetings that we're involved in and constantly giving updates to them and working with each other and figuring out monthly how we can improve our different processes across the state.
That's excellent. And, you brought up a good point, and I use the term MPO very loosely just to kind of refer to a regional government. But it was back in April, I think, that the North Carolina Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations had a big annual meeting here in Wilmington, and there were 500 plus people in attendance. I think normally there might be about 300 some, but this is really showing the significance that these organizations are bringing to the table to deliver projects either on their own or in concert with DOT and local governments. And it's really amazing how everybody comes together to work on these projects. Do you think there is anything else that makes these partnerships and the collaborations with NCDOT different or unique?
I think really having those rural planning organizations makes it very unique because they are able to have a voice. In other states, they aren't necessarily funding their rural planning organizations since it's not a federal requirement. So that makes it very unique to North Carolina, and also as having a prioritization process for even funding projects and being able to bring them into that process and letting them have a local say in that process makes North Carolina very unique as well. But we look at them as our partners. And so we are constantly collaborating with them, even to discuss how can we make the project delivery process better. Because we are involving them in the environmental permitting process because they are so close to our locals. Our RPOs are actually in our Council of Governments locations. And so many of our Council of Government locations are doing the comprehensive land use plans for counties and municipalities. They're also doing economic development for those counties and municipalities as well. And some of them are even doing some of the transit work for them as well. And so it's so important that, we work with them and that they bring a unique perspective because they are involved with all of it. Whereas NCDOT is so large, we have separate units for transit. We actually just combined transit and our bike and pedestrian unit into one unit for integrated mobility. But then we have a separate unit for transportation planning, a separate unit for construction, separate unit for maintenance. And so being able that those entities, our NPOs and RPOs, are actually interacting with all those different units, where some of us are kind of more so in our silos. And so they're able to break those barriers and working with everyone, I think is very good for us in the future.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And I think what will happen, it's more of a comprehensive regional plan as opposed to this local government thinks XYZ. And then when you transition from the corporate boundary of that city to another one. And, if it's not compatible, we as planners aren't doing our job. So I think that's really the crux of how we can continue to improve, but also bridge the gap between different towns and rural and suburban and urban areas and kind of have it all flow more organically together, as opposed to just this is what it is here and then completely different half a mile away.
I agree. And like the MPOs, they meet monthly with their technical coordinating committees, which is representatives from each of their municipalities in the county that sit on those actual seats. And then they also meet with their advisory council, which is your mayors and your councilmen as well. And for the MPOs, for the RPOs, they don't meet as often. They meet every other month, or they meet quarterly, depending on the larger their area. And so they are sharing this information with the locals back and forth, and we're able to get that information as well. And so I think that is what really helps that partnership, as you mentioned.
Definitely, definitely. And referring back to data, how do you think urban and transportation planners can leverage location data to help them plan better and create more comprehensive, but more importantly, complete transportation networks?
So the way that data can really help is that a prime example of this is bringing in our demographic information. As we start looking at disadvantaged populations, a key point of that is looking at where are those zero car households and where is our transportation system ending and starting. Are we meeting those first and last mile connections of making sure that we have sidewalks that can get into those particular communities so people can either walk or bike safely to the next transit stop, or bringing those transit stops in there. You can use your cell phone data to even more take you the extra mile if you felt like, people weren't able to get to the census information. Due to COVID, we realized there was a lot of constraints about people filling out the census. And so if you have that cell phone data, but then you also have your census data to tell you where those zero car households are, or even it not having broadband access. There are plenty of places throughout North Carolina that doesn't have broadband. And so you want to be able to figure out more loosely how can you bridge that gap even more, to be able to bring broadband to those areas. And so by being able to overlay all those things together, you're looking at bike and ped, you're looking at where your transit, you're also being able to look at in other areas, for your areas that are highly congested, you're able to see what are those peaks from your cell phone data, or from your tubes that we have continuous count tubes on certain roadways throughout North Carolina as well. So you're able to see where those peaks are and be able to look at, well, are there other opportunities such as managed lanes that maybe needs to be incorporated, or even if it's commuter rail that can be able to happen, and then use that data to also leverage if the commuter rail is actually going to be used in those particular areas or not. You can also use the data. We haven't really thought about using the data this way, and I think it's we need to think about it, is looking at following the people that are moving here from other states. We have a lot of people that are moving from out of state into North Carolina, and people are moving from places such as New York or DC and don't necessarily have a driver's license. And that's what I learned throughout doing my public engagement, is that people will come and they say, well, I came here, I thought we had a great transportation system, but then they realized the transportation system was really more so focused on highway and not the other modes of transportation. So being able to use that data more and really track how people are moving and where exactly they're moving to, and how we can better use that data to beef up some of our other modes of transportation, is really going to be able to help us in the future.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think we work with our demographic data appended to a lot of our origin destination trip matrices all the time. And what that allows planners to do is they can actually look at the socio demographics of what's going on with these people, because how somebody in one census block group or a tract or a neighborhood operates is quite different than another one. And it's all based on income or what they have or don't have access to. And whether it's average vehicle ownership or income, different things we can look at, because in a travel demand model, the willingness to pay for time or the willingness to carpool or all these other things vary based on the type of person. And now when we have that information, we can help boost and have a more equitable solution that is more fair to get things moving. And I really think just more people using this data will in turn in 5, 10, 15 years have much better projects delivered um, for that.
I agree totally.
So, we've definitely had a bunch of questions and almost used up all of our time, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today on the show, Nastasha. Our conversation has been extremely informative and enjoyable for me, but I also hope that all of our viewers were able to take in quite a bit of the different information that you brought forward. Definitely appreciate it and would love to open the door for you to chat with any of our viewers in the future as well, if you'd like.
Yes, thank you, Robert. Thank you so much for having me today. Yes, feel free, any viewers, please reach out and contact me. My email is available on NCDOT's website at nbearl-young at ncdot.gov. I welcome to continue the conversation. I'm also on LinkedIn, and we can talk about comprehensive transportation plans, the future of transportation, resiliency, and even public engagement. I do have a strong passion for public engagement, as we were able to reach over 3 million people with our statewide multimodal transportation plan. So I look forward to hearing from you guys. And thank you so much, Robert and AirSage, for having me today.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And with that, I wish all of you an amazing day and a great weekend. Come join us again for Air Sage's Brewing Data. Bye now.